Welcome. Before we begin, please be aware that our discussions on mental health issues may include sensitive topics and situations that could be triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised, and if you find these subjects distressing, we encourage you to seek support or skip episodes that may be uncomfortable for you. Your well-being is important to us. So, on my previous episode, I gave a brief overview on my childhood trauma and some of the impact it had on me and forming who I was, how I felt about myself. Today, I want to take more time to talk about my personal story and how my childhood abuse and trauma led me to make decisions that further led to overall unhealthiness and more trauma. So, just to recap, I suffered both physical and sexual, as well as verbal, mental, and emotional abuse for the entirety of my childhood. As the majority of this abuse was at the hands of my parents, it did not simply end once I reached adulthood. It just changed. It would take me years to realize that the verbal and emotional abuse was continuing, as sometimes the damage caused by that is harder to acknowledge because we don't see it in the same way we would a physical wound. In my early adulthood, I was overly sexual. I was dying for love and affection. I sought approval in whatever form I could find it and from anyone who was willing to give it to me. I had absolutely no standards for myself. I was dating anyone who showed interest in me. I was out partying as often as I could, trying to drown out the feelings that I was not ready to face. At less than a month after I turned 18, I was dating a man in his 40s. I told myself that love didn't have a number. I was still too young and way too victimized to see the danger in this situation. Thankfully, this relationship did not last. However, now I was alone, and being alone was not an option at that time. I soon met and fell in love with the father of my first biological child. I moved in less than a month after we started dating each other. This was not a healthy relationship either. We loved each other, no doubt, but neither of us were at the maturity level or a healed enough place to be good for or to one another. This person was also wounded and needed to do a lot of self-work. I will say that they have come a very far way, and we now co-parent our child very well. Things that happened in this relationship, such as infidelity, further led to my belief that I was unworthy of a healthy love and was nothing. I would never be good enough. I was still, at this point, putting my self-worth, my overall worth, in how other people viewed me and how other people treated me. It was not self-worth at all. It wasn't coming from me. I remember one specifically bad fight. I don't even remember what it was about, but I remember sitting on my bed and fighting with him. And as he stormed out of the house, he told me, "You fuck everything up. Everything." This was something I was told, but also by my abuser in childhood. And it did far more damage than I think either I realized or my partner at the time realized. It was said in anger, but it held so much weight. I stayed determined to love this person enough into loving me better and hoping that I could fix or heal them, help them in some way. I learned that you cannot heal another person the hard way, through heartbreak and tears. We actually conceived and lost a child just a month before conceiving our daughter. We had our child just 3 months before my 20th birthday. A micro-preemie, I delivered her at 28 weeks gestation. This experience, in and of itself, was also traumatizing. The labor process, the delivery, the being in a NICU for 58 days was extremely traumatizing. Just so many different aspects of that experience I would like to go into in another episode. Her father and I, however, did not last. We were released from the NICU and returned home, and I lived together with him for less than an entire month. Postpartum hit me hard. I was depressed, anxious, and felt alone. After many fights and turmoil, I suggested I stay the weekend at my mother's to try and get some support and rest. I was told to stay gone as long as I needed. In my mind, this immediately told me I was neither wanted or needed. I was a thing once again, and I had been discarded by the first man I'd ever truly loved. The man I'd borne a child for. I left for my mother's and never went back. Months later, looking for any work I was qualified for, while also caring for a medically fragile child who could only be watched by family as she was not strong enough to be in a daycare, I was also right back into the dating scene. On just about every dating app or social page you can think of, I thought I needed a romantic partner to validate me. I was lost, alone, and suicidal once again. The only thing keeping me hanging on was my daughter. What followed was years of short-lived toxic relationships and flings where I was abused in numerous ways. In these years, I was assaulted and raped. Most of these incidents I did not report or tell anyone about. I believed I got what I deserved for being the kind of person I was raised to believe was unworthy and ungodly. Bad things happen to bad people, right? I was also homeless on numerous occasions. I would make sure that my daughter was either with her father or staying with my mother, and I would sleep in my car. The thing I prided myself on was making sure she didn't have to live that reality with me. I couldn't do that to her, even if it meant I might have to lose her. Eventually, you guessed it, right back in with my mom. The only place I really had to go. Living with my mother did not prove healthy. I want to express that the things my mother has done for me and both of my biological children, I will never be able to repay. I do believe my mother is at her core a very loving, giving person. My belief is that my mother is also traumatized and unhealed, and that showed in how she parented and treated not only her offspring, but the people around her. To this day, my mother does things for me, and we actually have a relationship. I am thankful that she sheltered us and provided us for us when I was not able to. However, that does not negate the mental and emotional stress that she caused. There were many, many fights, and even a couple of years where my older sister, along with her husband and their first child, lived in the home. Cohabitating gave us both amazing, cherished memories and time together, as well as trauma for me. I never felt that I quite lived up to my mother's expectations, whereas my sister was her golden child. She had so far lived her life right on course to how our mother deemed that she should. Not only was I queer, I was also unmarried and a single mother, and I had denounced Christianity and started practicing as a witch. I was everything that my mother was against. As a matter of fact, I came out to my mother at the age of 14 during a car ride. Unexpectedly, unplanned. My mother was ranting about how homosexuality was an abomination and anyone who practiced it was going to go to hell. That if you felt that you were homosexual, you needed to pray and, God would handle it. But that if you accepted it and you lived life as a homosexual, that you would be going to hell. And I just blurted out, well, I guess I'm going to hell too then. Not the best planned coming out, but I had had enough of the years of hearing the hatred and the judgment for not only other people who I felt were worthy, who I know are worthy of basic human decency and respect, even if you don't agree with him. But hearing such hatred towards who I was, and I was tired of hiding. Things between my mother and I became very strained as I lived with her as an adult, just to get myself kind of back on course. And it became very clear that regardless of my financial situation, I would need to leave quicker than I planned. I was not living there for free. I contributed to bills as well as supplying all of the food in the household. However, I was apparently staying beyond my welcome. I moved out after a couple of years, first with a roommate. However, this proved to be a dangerous environment, not only for me, but my child, and I immediately started looking for somewhere else to rent. I found this really adorable, small, country, 2-bedroom home. It was older and definitely not perfect, but it was perfect for my child and myself. I put in an application less than an hour after viewing it, and I begged the universe as I drove home, if nothing else, give me this one thing. I'll never ask for anything again. Just this, please. I was driving back to the house that I was currently staying in with said roommate, where I felt unsafe, where I was no longer having my child stay until I knew that I could get somewhere else because I did not know what could possibly happen. That evening, after looking at this home and begging, I received a call that my application had went through. I cried. Right then and there on the phone with the realtor, I cried. This began my healing journey. This was the first house I ever turned into a home. A sanctuary for myself and my child. Although I felt shame that it had taken me this long into her life to provide her the environment that she had deserved since birth, I was so happy to finally be here. It was here in this home in 2019 that I began therapy, meditating and yoga. I finally felt the progress of healing. I seen the proof. And I began loving myself truly for the first time in my life. At 23, I had had so much trauma and life packed into such a short time span. I had a lot of work to do, but I was ready, I was prepared, and I did the work. I set out on a course. This home was my peace. For the first time in my entire life, after getting off of work or being at a family or a friend's house or doing anything social, anytime that I had to return home, I was actually excited. This was a home that I protected with everything. I was so careful with the energy that I brought into my space because this was mine. It was like my little gem, and I didn't want to take it tarnish. Unfortunately, it was in this process of loving myself and deciding to stay single. I had previously, even while being single, still been kind of sleeping around and doing my thing. I had decided to not do that any longer, that those things were distracting me from being able to truly heal and process not only the things that had happened to me in my life, but try to find who I was. Up until this point in my life, it had always really been who Katelyn was to everyone else, and I didn't really know anything about myself. I knew things that I had liked as a child. I knew things that I'd enjoyed doing as a child. But I didn't know anything about adult Katelyn. I was a shell of a person, or felt like one. And I decided that this was the time to really focus on finding me, truly. It was in this period of time that I met my second biological child's father. And initially we started out as friends. And even discussed how I did not wish to ever cohabitate with another person again, that I really liked my freedom and my independence, that I did not wish to have another biological child, which looking back now is ironic. because I did have another biological child and I absolutely adore her. I am incredibly thankful that although that journey was tough, she's what I got out of it. So yeah, it started out great. He presented himself to be a very healthy individual, great communication skills, a great outlook on life. He was kind to me. We had good conversations. I felt cared about. I felt interested in. And we pursued a relationship. Over the next, I want to say 2.5 years, it was very quickly revealed that he was not who he presented himself to be in the beginning. Anybody who's dealt with a narcissist or a person that has narcissistic traits knows that that's exactly what they do. They pretend to be an entirely different person. They love bomb you. They make you comfortable. And then right as you slip into that, the mask comes off. And not always all at once. You can kind of still think, well, maybe they'll change, or maybe it's not as it appears, especially when you're an already traumatized or abused individual, such as myself. At that point in time, I was healing, but I still did not have enough faith in my intuition to know to trust my gut. I felt that it was more me looking for red flags because I was traumatized when I should have trusted myself. To not go into extreme detail, over the next 2.5 years or so that I was with this person, I left on multiple occasions because of things that were going on. It just was not a healthy environment. I was taken back to a point of not loving myself, of being so depressed that I was suicidal once again. It was actually in this relationship that I started self-harming for the first time since I was a teenager. And I currently have the scars to prove that. It felt so defeating to have come so far in my healing journey, to be brought back to this place. But I did with him what I felt like I did with my first biological child's father, and I put my everything into that person instead of into myself. Very verbally, very emotionally abusive. It did get to the point of physical abuse, at the very end. And it was at this point that I left for good and never went back. We're actually currently no contact. I knew from the life I had lived as a child that if they are willing to put their hands on you once, they will do it again. And it will only get worse. And I was just solidified at this point. I knew not only did I not deserve that, but I could not do that to my children. Unfortunately, I had to leave behind my stepchildren, and that still breaks my heart to this day. It is still a very, very difficult decision to not have them be a part of my life or their half-sister's life. But I had to make a decision to protect me and my biological children, and I did that. It was after leaving this person and the people that helped me be able to leave that situation, because I was high risk with my youngest biological child, as I was with her sister, and had a very difficult pregnancy, and actually had worked up until 2 weeks before I had her. I had to quit my business. I had to start Ubering. I nannied as well. I did anything to make sure that I had income, because my so-called partner at the time, her father, did not financially support me. But because I worked up until the end, right before I had her, I didn't have any savings. All of that money went to paying my bills. So I didn't have any financial means of leaving him once it got to the point of knowing that that's what I had to do. So if it was not for the people that reached out to me and said, I will help you, get out of that. One of which is actually my current partner. And that started a whole new chapter of my life where I was able to get in with a new therapist, get in with a new psychiatrist, and heal from yet again another traumatic experience. But it really proved to me that healing is not linear. That as defeating as it felt to be knocked what felt like so far back in my healing journey, that I needed to have grace with myself. I needed to forgive myself because I didn't even blame him. I blamed myself. I blamed myself for allowing another person to treat me in such a manner. And so the first few months after leaving him over a year ago was showing myself forgiveness. Looking back and deciding what I could learn from the experience and how to move forward and not dwell in just the sadness. Allowing myself to grieve as well. I've never really allowed myself to grieve from any of my traumatic experiences. And I've come so far since leaving this relationship. My children are thriving. I am thriving. And I really think it just goes to show that a person can go through things that are meant to break you. And even be broken. There are numerous occasions, especially in my adulthood and dealing with the trauma and the abuse I had from childhood as well as adulthood, that I was broken. My heart wasn't just broken. My spirit was crushed. I did not know how I was going to get up the next day. But I managed. And so I want my story to be a testament that healing is not linear. You will fall down. Sometimes you might not be able to get back up in that moment, or the next day, or the next week, but you will get back up. You have to have that faith in yourself. You have to find that very, very core belief, and it might be buried extremely deep within your soul, but it is there. You have to find that. You have to reach out, find any resources you can, even if they're not from your family or your friends, because sometimes they don't know what to do. Or, they might not care in the way that we feel like they should care. So find any outside resources that you can and just don't give up on yourself. Shut out the expectations of society. Shut out the expectations from your family or even yourself, and give yourself grace and just focus on breathing. Keep your heart beating and know that you are incredibly worthy to be here. So guys, I think that wraps up my story for today. In future episodes, I would like to go more in detail of specific events, such as my experience with my first biological child, and things such as that. But I hope that this episode was useful. I hope in telling my story, I help someone. Thank you so much for joining us today on Healing Echoes. We hope you, our listeners, found today's episode as enlightening and thought-provoking as we did. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone who might benefit from these discussions. We'll be back with more engaging conversations and insightful content soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, take care and remember that your journey matters.